My name is Dominic Fuge, and I'm the Head of Careers and Higher Education at Cardiff Sixth Form College, Cambridge. Well, my role involves, being Head of Careers and Higher Education, you can kind of almost divide them into two separate parts. Perhaps we'll begin with the higher education. So pretty much all of our students apply to universities in the UK. Equally, I've noticed that about 60% of students, we now call this model the UCAS Plus because it's becoming so competitive, students apply to the UK and also apply to maybe one or two or three other countries as well across the world. So we have students apply to Hong Kong, for instance, Australia, some places in Europe. We have one student this year who's applying to a medical school in Italy, another student who's thinking about the Netherlands. Of course, we have a lot of students aiming for North America as well, Canada, US. So my role really involves managing a team to help students find what they want to do quite early on when they join us at the school, and then be very strategic and bespoke to give them what they need in order to get them to their dream university. So that might involve interview prep. Naturally, we'll work on personal statements. We'll also be quite strategic as well in terms of where students are aiming and how we're helping them make those connections and find their best fit institution. We meet with students all the time, extremely regularly, and we have an open door policy, so we can have an unlimited number of one-to-one meetings. I have actually noticed with some institutions, they have a set number of meetings that students can have each year. We don't have that at all. So we have an open door policy. Students can come in whenever they want. They can book a meeting in advance if they want to secure their time, because on occasion it can be quite busy, so they can have their slot ready. Equally, if we're not already in a meeting, students can just wander in, sit down, ask what they want, talk about whatever it might be in terms of careers and higher education. So we might help with work experience, for instance, using our network. We have, especially at this part of the college, we have the Cambridge Edge. So we network with the university, we network with local businesses. Students can have great work experience, which makes them more competitive with their university applications. They might also have some very specific questions about interviews, admissions tests, so we can help them with all of those things. So we have, I would say probably on average, throughout a year, maybe we'll have about 15 to 20 one-to-one meetings with students. On average, of course, some have a lot more, some maybe have a little bit less. One-to-one meetings don't actually just happen with students, they also happen with parents, they happen with guardians. So if a parent wants to meet with me or with somebody else from the team, they just need to send an email, we'll get back to them, we'll choose a time and we can do that virtually. We can also do it in person if they happen to be in the area as well. I've noticed quite a few parents might visit their children, and if they're in the area, they can also come in, very welcome, and we can meet face to face. There are quite a few timelines throughout the year when you're thinking about where students are applying, if it happens to be the US, if it happens to be Australia. Looking at the UK, for example, the UCAS process, there are a couple of key dates. So UCAS opens in September, so students can start submitting their applications from around about that time. There are two key deadlines. One is in October and the other is in January. So October is for students who are aiming for Oxford or Cambridge, medicine, dentistry, vet med. That's the early deadline, typically falls on the 15th of October. Then we have another deadline which is in January, towards the end of January, where all other students apply to universities which are not Oxbridge and subjects which are not the ones that I've just mentioned. All of those aim for January. Now what's really interesting, which separates our school from others, Cardiff Sixth Form College, is that we aim for the early deadline for all of our students. Now that's really interesting. I do network with other schools. I do try and see what's happening because we want to stay at the forefront of all of our policies and innovation. And I don't think, and it's quite bold to say this, so it might get fact checked. I don't know if we're doing that in the video, but I definitely think that we're probably the only institution where we have students aim, all students, no matter their subject choices, aim for the early deadline. That does a couple of things. First and foremost, luckily we're number one in the UK for A-level results, and that's been consistent over a number of years, so we've really perfected our craft. When we have students apply early, it means that they've submitted their applications at a point where they have lots of time to actually perfect their academics studies, so to get those A stars and those top grades. So when they submit early, they're not thinking about, for example, their personal statement during Christmas. They have already submitted, they're potentially already holding offers, and they can focus on their studies. What it also does is when students submit early, is it gives them more chances, I think, of getting an offer, because there is something known as the equal consideration deadline, which happens in January. However, it's very difficult to police this process of giving students an equal chance. I'm sure universities do work really hard to try and make that happen. However, when students do apply early, we've seen G5, Russell Group, very exciting competitive institutions giving offers really early, before Christmas, actually even before the deadline in October. So we have students submit in September, towards the beginning of October, and actually this year, 37% of our students already held one Russell Group offer before the deadline in October. So not even January, but the early deadline in October. So our policy is really to tell students to forget about the January deadline. That doesn't exist. Of course, if there are extreme circumstances and they might need to use that deadline, of course, by all means, but we want all students to submit early. That has a huge impact on their application success. It also demonstrates to universities that students are very good with their time management because they're submitting early. About 1/3 of our students apply to Oxbridge. Even if they don't apply to Oxbridge, it makes universities, gives the impression that they are an Oxbridge applicant, which I don't think is a bad thing, necessarily. So it plays in our students' favour to submit early. Now I should say as well, it's not easy to submit early. There's a lot of support that students need in terms of preparing their personal statements, choosing which universities. You can only choose a maximum of 5 universities, so making sure that they have the right choice. There's also a reference that schools have to produce as well for their students. So students submit a 4,000 character personal statement. We as a school also submit a 4,000 character reference. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes in order to make this happen. But if we have the right planning, we have the right team, the wind is in our sails, so to speak, then there's no reason why we can't submit early, and that has a huge impact for students in terms of success. So we have a couple of guiding principles which I think are really important, especially if students are thinking about joining Cardiff Sixth Form College, Cambridge branch, or of course the Cardiff branch too. One, I think, is that strong grades are a byproduct of passion. As you'll hear a few times, we are #1 in the UK for A-level results. It feels great every time. You say it as many times, it still feels great every time. It feels like the first time when you mention it. It's really lovely. So it's great that we are #1. However, I think the reason that we have such high grades is not just because our students work very hard, naturally they do. It's not just because we have great teachers. It's also because we have students who are super passionate about what they want to do in terms of their career and higher education aspirations. So if a student knows that they want to be a medic, or they want to be an engineer, or they want to study architecture, whatever it might be, if they have that goal, then they're going to work harder. They're going to do those extra hours in the evening. They're going to read around their subjects. They're going to work really hard to maybe secure work experience, or to go to these guest lectures. Especially us, we're based in the city centre of Cambridge. There are so many guest lectures and opportunities with the university that students take full advantage of. So when they're passionate, when they know what they want to study, then I think they're more likely to work very hard to get there. The other second principle that I think is really important to mention is that students need to work in parallel. This concept of doing 2 things at the same time. We want students to have great grades because it's great for their CV in the future, but it's also, and just their development as individuals, but it's also great to get them into certain institutions. When you have those high grades, it opens up more opportunities. But you need to do both at the same time. So you need to study quite hard, but you also need to develop your supercurricular profile and your university research. So getting your applications through at the same time as studying. We can't forget about the studies, do a lot of work on the personal statements. We need to do both. You need to continue to study, and you need to develop your supercurricular profile and identifying which universities are right for you. The careers aspect of the role is really exciting because the world is really limitless in terms of what students can do. And that's what I really love about the role is how boundless it is. We've had students in the past, for example, quite recently, who have had an internship with PwC. We've had students who maybe even go to their home countries during the holiday periods and do really exciting things with law firms, with hospitals. I've noticed, for example, in the UK, and I'm always impressed with the number of work experience placements that students source themselves with UK hospitals. That's great. But there are quite a few regulations in the UK And it's quite interesting to hear students come back maybe from Malaysia or another country and be part of open heart surgery, or at least being in the same operating theatre, which is something which you wouldn't necessarily be able to do in the UK. We are part of what's known as Dukes Plus as well. So we have the Medic Portal, we have Investin, we have Oxbridge applications. So when it comes to work experience, students can also latch on to these different companies, which we benefit from in terms of being part of the same organisation. So the careers role is really about, I would say, in a nutshell, it's giving students skills for life. So they develop themselves when they're with us now. That helps them with their university applications, but equally it gives them skills which they can later use in their futures. Within Cardiff Sixth Form College, Cambridge, we actually have a modular careers programme, as I call it. So we have different modules, workshops perhaps, focusing on different very important skills. And then we want to see tangible outcomes as well. So for example, we have a CV and cover letter workshop, and then we want to see students produce their own CVs and cover letters and go even a step further and take part in work experience. So using those CVs and cover letters to network and engage with organisations, with companies, and then source their own opportunities. So we teach, we work together as a team, we supplement that with one-to-one support, and then we see true tangible outcomes very, very early on, in the first year, for example, when students join us. So students have sourced a range of really interesting work experience opportunities with quite well-known companies. For example, we had a student who was looking at finance and international banking, so she sourced a great opportunity with HSBC. We also had a student who's very interested in consulting and building business relationships and strategy. So she had a great placement with PwC, for instance, which is one of the big four and a very famous consultancy firm. So we want students to not only learn in the classroom, naturally, but we want them to go out and experience the world of work. So we've had students visit a number of interesting places. For example, a BMW plant in Oxford. So we're looking at the development of cars from an engineering perspective, but also marketing and how businesses operate. We've also had students go to the Freud Museum, for instance, to see the house of Sigmund Freud. We've had students go to Bletchley Park, which is very interesting from a coding perspective in modern times, even though they were looking, of course, at the past of coding. We've had students go to Silverstone as well. So one thing we do here is really focus on supercurricular profile building, and there's a huge difference between what's known as supercurricular and extracurricular. So anything that a student does outside of the classroom, I would call co-curricular. And then underneath the umbrella of co-curricular, so anything they do outside of the classroom, there are two aspects here. One is supercurricular and the other is extracurricular. Extracurricular is non-academic. So music, unless they want to study music at university, but if it's just a hobby, perhaps, let's say, music, sports, those are extracurricular activities. Supercurricular is what really separates students from others in university applications, where they're showing that they have the motivation to take part in interesting activities which supports their university applications, enhances their knowledge of their future subjects. So for example, let's say that a student was very interested in architecture. They might join a guest lecture, which involves architecture. They might do an online course. They might do an essay competition. They might somehow be part of, maybe get student membership with RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects. So lots of things that you can do outside of the classroom. The University of Cambridge recommends that 80% of a UCAS personal statement is supercurricular content. I was talking with UCL last week. They mentioned 75 to 85%, so definitely over half. Lots of schools and quite a few students don't really think about the difference between supercurricular and extracurricular. And so that's really where the Careers Department adds a lot of value to the student journey by helping them find really interesting supercurricular activities.